So hello and welcome to the Potted RV. We missed Tuesday's video because I had a really bad storm come through after I had attempted to record the video and forgot to turn my mic on, and 36 minutes of mouth moving but nothing really going on. Adjust this camera just a touch. So we're going to re-record this video. Thankfully I'm able to. Today we're going to be going over how I maintain my blueberries. Now, I keep my blueberries in a pot, and I always will, because I want the control of maintaining the soil acidity levels that I get with keeping them in a pot versus having kept them in ground. Obviously, in this situation, I couldn't put them in ground anyways. I live in an RV park. But I'll never put these guys in ground no matter what, whether my living situation changes or not. They're still going to be in pot plants, and they will remain that way. They were bought with that intention. I have some notes and information I want to go over because I have noticed with a lot of information I have found on YouTube in regards to blueberries in particular, there's a lot of misinformation. So I wanted to cover a few things that I've pulled from the Oregon State University's Extension Office on the different varieties and different cultivars of blueberries. There are actually 5 different cultivars of blueberries, and not all of them are self-fertile. So if you're going to buy blueberries, you want to know which one you're getting and whether or not it's good for your climate and what you're intending to do with it. Some of them are great for commercial use, but not so great for home gardening use. So I will be right back. I'm going to go ahead and get the notes so that I make sure I cover this correctly. So we have notes. Most information that you find online will at least tell you the correct acidity, which that's correct. It's the amount of cultivars and how they function that really drove me crazy when I was getting ready to purchase blueberries, because I wanted to know for a fact that I was getting what I needed for my area. One of the big things is I grew up spending a part of my childhood in Minnesota, and we traditionally would go out in the spring and summer. I think it was late summertime, that we would go out and we would pick wild blueberries. They are very specific to their needs, and I knew that given the fact that they're native to Minnesota, they're not going to handle my warmer climate. Oklahoma isn't really, really hot climate, but it's still a warmer climate compared to Minnesota. It was important to me to know that I was getting the right thing, and the more information I would dig through, the more I was finding that there's a lot of misinformation, that the person putting it out there really didn't look into them. They just looked into what was significant to their area. And I'd rather cover all of the areas, at least in the United States, and all the types, so that if you're going to look and purchase a blueberry plant, you have an idea of what you're wanting to do. Now, like I said, I pulled this information mostly from the Oklahoma Extension Office, not Oklahoma Extension, the Oregon State University's Extension Office, and I will put a link to that information below. The soil requirements for all of them, pretty much a standard across the board, is between 4.5 and 5.5 in a pH level. So on the acidic side. They're not a mildly acidic plant like strawberries where they like it a little acidic, but not terribly acidic. They want it pretty acidic. They like their acid. There are some things I go about doing that are kind of different than everybody else I've seen. When I go to handle acidity levels for mine get fertilized every month and a half with an acid-loving fertilizer. I use one that's specifically designed for acid-loving plants. This is the one I have found that is easy for me to locate, which is why I use them. And this one's by Expert Gardener. Now, with applying sulfur amendment, that I have gotten a little specific on. A lot of the ones that you can find in the local box stores, they work just fine, but they're slow acting. The way sulfur works to acidify your soil is through bacteria. The bacteria break it down, and that's what acidifies the soil. It's actually the water content of the soil. The soil itself is not. It's what the water does when it hits the soil. And I I wanted something that was a bit faster acting. So I have one that is partially in an easier form for bacteria to break down. The one you get in the big box stores is just basic sulfur. And it works just fine as long as you maintain your soil acidity levels. If you have an emergency where your soil has climbed above 5.5, if you're using that type of a soil acidifier that you get in the big box stores, you're going to have a problem, and you may potentially lose your plant if you don't take emergency steps to control the acid level in your soil while the bacteria is breaking down the sulfur you've added. One of the things you can do, a lot of people I've seen will recommend using distilled vinegar, a teaspoon of distilled vinegar in a gallon of water. I don't like that method because it does tend to kill a lot of the microlife in the soil. I typically will use about a tablespoon of lemon juice mixed in a gallon of water, and I'll check the acidity and make sure that it's sitting at about 4.5, and then I'll add it in. I haven't had to do that with these guys, so these guys should be okay. I always, because I am dealing with potted plants, I go through and I add sulfur every 3 months. And like I said, I add fertilizers, acid-loving fertilizers every month and a half. Now, I have mine on a 3-month schedule. They are March, June, September, December. If it multiplies by 3, it's it's in that group that month that I do it. And we are coming up on June 1st, so they are due. Now, I had already done the other one. I had recorded all of that, but I didn't put any sound in it because I forgot to turn my mic on. So I use, instead of using the sulfur that you get at a big box store, I use Earth Sciences fast-acting sulfur. This is the one I prefer. I don't have a sulfur issue come up that I have to use emergency methods, like using lemon juice until my pH balance with this one. Whereas the other one, because it's just strictly sulfur for being broken down, it sometimes can happen. It's more likely to happen if your plants are in the ground than if they're in a pot, but it does happen, and you do want to maintain that. So what I do now, when I first put them in, I use the instructions as close as I can get it, because this is not actually meant for potted plants. This is actually meant for in-ground plants, but it will work for potted plants too. And what I typically do is, because it's 5 pounds per 500 square feet, I try to roughly estimate that it's about a cup for the size pots I have these guys in. Now, these guys have to be topped up with soil, so we are going to cover topping up with soil. These guys aren't being up potted, so I don't need to worry about doing the exact cup. What I'll do is a half a cup, and because I'm adding soil to it, not up potting, but I am adding soil to them as well, so I'm going to go ahead and do half a cup. And I will do that before I put new soil over the top of it, and then just kind of gently massage it in. I'm also going to add fertilizer too, because they still fall in that month and a half category. Still lands when I do this too, which normally it would be about a third of a cup, but because I'm also adding soil on top of this, I'm going to be doing a half a cup just to make sure that the bacteria in the soil have plenty of sulfur to break down, so that I don't have a pH climb. So we're going to line everything up and get through that here in just a minute. But before we go into that, I want to cover the 5 different types of blueberries and what you need to know about them if you're going to be purchasing blueberries. Most people know about high bush and low bush. That's what most everybody you can find online will explain, is it's a high bush and a low bush. There's actually 2 different types of high bush. There's the northern high bush, which is native to the eastern United States, and then there's the southern high bush, which is actually a hybrid. It's a hybrid of a native to Florida and I can't pronounce um, the scientific names that were given for them, but they're a hybrid. They're a cross between a Florida species and the northern high bush to make a cultivar blueberry that is good for warmer climates that still produces like the northern high bush does, which is they're heavy producers, whereas the Florida native that I could find any information on, they're not heavy producers like the northern, but they do produce okay. But it allows for blueberries to be grown in areas that have very low chill hours. Most of your other cultivars outside of the southern high bush, most of them, with the exception of one other one, and I will get to that one in a minute, most of them require over 800 hours of chill hours. The southern high bush only requires between 200 and 300 chill hours. So it's well suited for really, really warm climates. I could have gone with one that needed a little bit more chill hours, but not by much, in all honesty. Both the two high bushes average about, I think it's like 6 to 10 feet tall if they're in the ground. They won't get as large if they're, it's 6 to 9 feet. They won't get as large if they're in a pot. That's not really that surprising. You have rabbit eye, which I thought was such a strange name for them, but that's what they're called, is rabbit eye. They're bred specifically for places that have very hot, long summers. They have much noticeable more seeds and a much thicker skin. They're very, very sensitive to cold. They don't do well with cold. They're also not self-fertile. You do have to have another rabbit eye variety around in order for them to fertilize at all and get fruit at all. But they do need a long, hot summer in order to have their fruit even ripen. So if you're trying to grow them where I'm at, it's not going to work. It's not long enough or hot enough. A little bit further south, even an hour south of me, probably could grow rabbit eyes. I'm not sure they would need to. They don't get that hot, but rabbit eye is one you're going to find more commercial setting for, like people in Florida where they're doing commercial blueberry growing. You'll find rabbit eye varieties there because they have very long, hot summers, and it's a high production variety. I wouldn't call it a variety, it's a cultivar. And then you have the low bush, which low bush are kind of what most people think of when they think of wild blueberries. I know they are definitely what I think of when I think of wild blueberries because I grew up in Summers, northern Minnesota, picking this exact type of blueberry as a kid. They're native to Minnesota all the way down into Virginia. They average between a foot to a foot and a half tall. They don't really get much bigger than that. And most of the way they spread is by stems in the ground where they steadily kind of remind me of Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass does that. Long stems, they just pop up everywhere. Your low bush does the same way, but it's also one of them that isn't self-fertile, but it can pollinate with a high bush or a low bush type. Either one can pollinate low bush type. So even if you have a high bush and you decide you really like this one particular low bush variety, it will still pollinate as long as they flower at the same time. Then you have half highs, which half highs were specifically bred for commercial production, and they're used where other cultivars are not really that hardy in colder climates, so way, way up north. They handle much cooler climates. They're also very good for containers because they don't get that big to begin with. They average between 3 and 4 feet tall. The thing is if you're going to grow them in containers like I do, just know they're never going to get as big as they would have if they were in the ground. So mine should average between 6 to 9 feet. It's not going to get anywhere near that size. I will be lucky if it gets 5 feet tall. And I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly okay with that. Now this one is less than a year old, and I can tell by its height and size. It's less than a year old. It does obviously produce fruit. My son likes to rate it, and it doesn't have any fruit left because he's cleaned it completely dry. And none of the fruit should be ripe, and it wasn't. They shouldn't ripen until late summer. That's typically when your fruit's going to ripen for blueberries. Mine is both of mine are the same variety. They're both the sunshine variety. They're well suited for growing zones 5 through 10. So I wouldn't push it to 5 by what I was looking at for its chill hours, and it's gonna go dormant probably, but I would go probably 5B at the lowest, but you definitely could be wrong. I grow it much warmer climate. They do just fine. One thing about your warmer climate varieties, they can remain evergreen. If the climate doesn't get too terribly cold, especially with rabbit eyes, they can stay evergreen year round if you don't have a frost. But that frost isn't necessarily going to kill it, it's going to send it into dormancy with most of them. Now, I'm unsure about rabbit eyes because they're bred specifically for really hot climates, so that one I couldn't find any information on whether or not you would want to avoid having those at all in any area that you might get frost. But I couldn't find information on whether or not that's an issue, so I'm not going to say one way or the other. My suspicion is that they wouldn't handle the cold, but that's just a suspicion. And that's pretty much what I was able to locate. All of your high bush varieties, all of them are self-fertile, although you will get larger fruit if you have a different variety in along the same area so that they can cross-pollinate. I don't. Mine are both the same variety, so the fruit's not going to be as large as it would have been if I had two different varieties. So I need to go ahead and get this done and get these guys covered. This video is already pushing almost 20 minutes long, so I don't want to push it too much longer. So let's go ahead and get into getting them situated. And I definitely want to be able to show you what I'm doing as best I can, so we're going to try to get this situated. Okay? All right, hopefully I've got it in the right area. Let's hope. So I start with, because of the fact that I'm going to be doing the sulfur amendment and adding the soil in to top them up, and that's because it has sank since I put them down. There's some of the roots are starting to show a little bit. Not that these guys ever seem to mind it. Now, in my case, 2 handfuls is about half a cup of sulfur, so that's basically what I'll end up adding. And I'm going to try to move this back so you can see. I'll just lay it over the top. And then I will massage it in just a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and add the soil into it. And I want to avoid covering the stems here as best I can, but I do want to top the soil up because it is sinking, and that's standard. I mean, I have come to find out that, anytime you have potted plants, you're going to have to do this fairly often, at least twice a year in my case. But it makes it to where, okay, any excess soil that I have that I don't have any use for, I'm not storing around everywhere, so that comes in handy. This doesn't have to be watered in. When you're topping them up like this, it's not necessary to water them in. I will on occasion, depending on how dry both the soil I'm adding is, as well as how dry the soil in the blueberry plant to begin with already is. This one isn't. It rained recently, and of course I water because they're in potted plants and we are coming into the hotter parts of the summer. I water about every day, at least the blueberries, because they do prefer to not be standing in water but they do want to have enough water to where they have access to water all the time. So that's just how I work them out. And that's what works for me. These guys are looking really, really pretty. They're getting really, really dense. These guys, my variety in particular, does grow quite quickly. And I happen to enjoy them. They're very, very pretty, even when I don't ever see any fruit because my son likes to steal them. That's okay. And that's basically it for caring for blueberries. They're scary to a lot of people because they require such specific soil requirements, but it depends on how you grow them, even in ground, as long as you maintain their soil acidity. And my recommendation is, if you're going to put them in ground, to invest in a pH tester. I have a pH tester, but not the style that most people use. I have one where you actually use strips. That's because mine are in potted soils. I'm not as concerned. So I just want a baseline reading rather than a fairly accurate one. So I don't have one of the more expensive ones. It's just not necessary for me. But if you're going to have them in ground, I definitely recommend getting a high quality probe style pH tester specifically for soil. It'll make your life a lot easier, and it also adds a lot of peace of mind, particularly with your blueberries, because nobody likes losing a plant, especially one that you spend so much time taking care of because they require so much work. Losing one for the simplest of reasons, definitely nobody wants to do that. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next one. You have a good day.